Given that WWE in many ways is all run thanks to one man, it's not too surprising to hear you can get on the wrong side of Vince McMahon. There's no way you can be in charge for that long and not fall out with some of your employees, and that of course will come with some level of consequence. When we're talking about World Wrestling Entertainment, that can see certain individuals left out on the cold for years. The interesting thing though is that there always seems to be a way to make amends as long as you've served enough time on the other side. If it makes sense for business or Vince just decides the past should be the past, these folk can swan back into the company as if nothing ever happened. It's the embodiment of ups and downs when it comes to the world's biggest wrestling promotion. But who suffered the most? Well, I'm Simon from WhatCulture, and this is 10 stretches of punishment WWE stars had to endure to be forgiven. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to stay notified. Ding, ding, done. Number 10, Paul Heyman. Heyman and McMahon were at war in 2006, butting heads over creative, and Paul's decision to try and question everyone possible in order to keep them on their toes, it exploded in everybody's face when the two parted ways. I don't think either were too upset about it at the time. Coming to a head after WWE had decided to bring back ECW as its own brand, Heyman just couldn't stand what the plans regarding that were, whereas McMahon wasn't going to listen to anybody else to any great degree given it was now under his watch. That resulted in the abysmal December to Dismember pay-per-view, which many also claimed saw Heyman and McMahon just lose it with one another. That probably explains why it was so awful. Paulie would walk out and wouldn't return to WWE for 6 years, where he would come back alongside Brock Lesnar, who was also re-affiliating himself with pro wrestling. That's a long time to be away, and yet everyone seemed more than pleased to see him. Number 9, the Macho Man Randy Savage. There's a bunch of rumours and hearsay when it comes to Randy Savage, but for now, let's just focus on what we do know and what we don't. In short, when the Macho Man left the WWE commentary booth to jump ship to WCW, he was persona non grata within the company he made his name in for 20 years. That's quite the sentence. The real issue was that in 1994, McMahon had decided Savage was done and should move into an announcing role. Randy disagreed, allowed his contract to expire before signing a big money deal with World Championship Wrestling. The results were mixed, but given he didn't actually hang up his boots till 2005, probably justifies that decision. That's over an extra decade of wrestling in case you don't want to do the maths. It is said that Vince was hurt by the move as he saw Savage as a WWE loyalist, and what's worse is that they didn't make amends before his tragic death in 2011. A documentary was made in 2014 ending this absence, as well as a Hall of Fame induction the following year. Number 8, Jeff Jarrett. There's so many different stories about what happened in 1999 that we will just stick to the headlines, but it does seem as if 19 years ago Jeff Jarrett held up the WWE for around about $300,000 due to a crazy set of circumstances. As I'm sure you can figure out, that didn't go down well with the boss. For you see, at No Mercy of that year, Jarrett's contract had expired, even though he was the IC champion and had a match against China. Already deciding that he was going to join WCW, he demanded money he believed was already rightfully his. Jeff didn't think he would ever receive it given he was about to join the competition. With no choice but to go along with it, McMahon agreed, getting his own revenge 2 years later when he fired Jeff Jarrett live during the Raw Nitro simulcast. This is why when he was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2018, he ended a 19-year departure and finally got back into everybody's good books. Isn't wrestling bizarre? The answer is yes. Number 7, Bruno Sammartino. It seems strange these days that someone who was pivotal to the then WWF's success was nothing more than a ghost for 25 years. But that is what happened after Bruno Sammartino decided to go public with his criticism of both Vince McMahon and the WWE. After he left the spotlight in 1988, Bruno went on the offensive, often going on talk shows to lambast wrestling for what it had become, as well as the overuse of steroids. If you can't work out how the company reacted to that, well, just go do a little bit of research. Throw in that Sammartino had also sued Vince McMahon Sr. for monies owed, and relationships were shot despite plenty of attempts by WWE to try and mend this rift. Somehow Triple H was the person to fix this in 2013, allowing Bruno to get the plaudits he deserved before he unfortunately passed away earlier this year. Number 6, Jim Ross. This story is always weird to me as I was in attendance on this fateful day and I didn't think anything awry had happened at all. Someone at WWE HQ did though, because after Jim Ross hosted a WWE 2K14 roster reveal, he was axed from the company for 4 years. Why? Well, Ric Flair had been particularly amped up this night and essentially took over the presentation. JR was deemed to have failed at his job to control the situation, and that was that. Now, many people say Flair was drunk, and maybe he was. I didn't smell his breath, but there was a jolly atmosphere from start to finish, which made this fallout even more confusing. JR said he was retiring from WWE, but the truth was he'd been given his walking papers. Things would stay this way until WrestleMania 33, when Ross returned to the commentary table to announce Roman Reigns versus The Undertaker, which, yes, meant 4 years in the wilderness. Number 5, Scott Hall. When the NWO walked into the WWE in 2002, it was a bit of a flop. There's no two ways about it. Like many WCW ideas that made their way up north, none were given any room to breathe and dive before they even had a chance to live. In this sense, though, there was also the issues of Scott Hall. Leaving the company the same year due to his erratic behaviour, Hall's personal problems continued to drag him down to the point WWE just didn't feel like he could stay on their books. No one knows exactly the reasons, but murmurs of him turning up to live events drunk didn't help, and it would be 12 years until he was invited back to be inducted into the Hall of Fame after getting all the help from professional saviour DDP. Today it's a lovely story of redemption and inspiration, but back in the early 2000s you'd have been hard pushed not to understood why WWE did what they had to do. Maybe in some way, it helped get him to where he needed to be. Number 4, Sable. Well, this one makes sense given that Sable sued the company. I mean, yeah, you do that and you're going to be on the outs for a while, or in this case, 4 years. Regardless what you think about Sable too, you can't deny how important she was to the Attitude Era. One of the most popular stars of the period, she just so happened to fall foul to that classic Batman saying, "You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain." Falling afoul of many of her peers, this also resulted in butting heads with management, which saw her get stripped of the women's title in May 1999. Then Sable quit, and a $110 million lawsuit followed. Oh boy. Citing unsafe working conditions and sexual harassment, WWE countersued for the rights to her ring name. Eventually the pair settled out of court, but it took years for their relationship to truly mend itself. Returning in 2003, Sable would enter a program with fellow Playboy cover girl Tori Wilson, but this run only lasted around a year. In August 2004, she left to focus on her family, and as far as I'm aware, we haven't seen her on WWE TV since. She lets her husband do all that now instead. Number 3, Steve Austin. Always a moment that's fun to debate because in many ways, Stone Cold Steve Austin's actions in 2002 were 100% on the money. Prior to Raw on the 10th of June, the Rattlesnake was told he was going to lose to Brock Lesnar in a King of the Ring qualifier, which made Austin very confused. He was more than happy to lose to the next big thing down the line, but as a throwaway match on Monday night, he felt the Stone Cold character had more power than that and made everyone know it wasn't going to happen. As we know, he walked away from WWE after this for 8 months as it seemed like the hero of the day was going to leave the company like so many others had before him. McMahon and Austin eventually managed to shake hands and move on, even if it did cost Stone Cold $250,000 in fines. When he was away though, he was torn from pillar to post as everybody was instructed to bury Austin as much as they could. What's even more interesting are the reasons behind this. No one will ever know for sure, but before all this kicked off, Steve had been on Bite This where he was more than critical of WWE's current direction. Was the Lesnar defeat a punishment for this? Maybe, but either way, it was a black spot in Austin's history he'd like to forget. Number 2, Hulk Hogan. As of me saying these words, Hulk Hogan has not returned to WWE TV, but it seems like it's only a matter of time. Reinstated into the company's Hall of Fame back in July 2018 after the sex tape racism scandal that went down in front of the world's eyes, it clocked up to be a 3-year absentee spell for the Immortal One. Personally, given all the fallout, I think it'd be better if he stayed away. What do I know? In case this is news to you too, the summary goes thusly. Not only did Gawker Media leak a sex tape featuring Hogan, but in it the Hulkster used language that can only be described as horrendous racism. His career in tatters, he sued Gawker, eventually reaching a $31 million settlement the following year, but remained blacklisted from WWE for obvious reasons. It remains a delicate situation that shows no signs of dying down, regardless what happens in the end, and his eventual re-emergence on television will no doubt bring the debate back to the forefront. Regardless, WWE seems to think the storm has passed and also believe they can now make money together again. That's all there is to it. Number 1, The Ultimate Warrior. The Ultimate Warrior was away from the WWE for 17 years. That is a long-ass time. Happening due to many fallouts with Vince McMahon, this story is proof that you can never completely burn your bridge with WWE. It first began in 1992, where the once Jim Hellwig no-showed a bunch of house shows after the company clamped down on his steroid use. He was in some sort of semi-retirement for around 4 years before he packed up in 1996 and squashed Triple H at WrestleMania 12. Months later there were more issues and he was gone again. This is fun, isn't it? It continued to get worse too. Warrior took WWE to court in 1996 and 1998 over ownership of his character, while he would also rip into the promotion whenever he could in what were, to be fair, some pretty crazy and difficult to hear rants. Even after all of this though, there was enough of a relationship left to salvage as he was inducted into the 2014 Hall of Fame. Maybe CM Punk will return one day after all.